Good afternoon and welcome to this Grattan Institute speed briefing webinar on our latest report, Graduates in Limbo, International Student Visa Pathways After Graduation. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Trent Wiltshire. I'm the Deputy Program Director, Migration and Labour Markets. Joining me is Tyler Reisenbach, a co-author on the report and an associate at Grattan Institute.
Hello.
First, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're presenting from today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to the elders past and present. I'd also like to thank the Scanlon Foundation for their generous contribution that has made Grattan's migration work possible. So I'll get into the presentation now. So our report, Graduates in Limbo, looks at post-study work rights and how to improve international students' outcomes and visa pathways after they graduate. First, I'm going to set the scene by looking at international students. So there are a lot of international students in Australia. So the left-hand chart there shows Australia's international students per 1,000 of population in 2019, so pre-COVID. And you can see the red bar there is much higher than comparable countries like New Zealand, Canada, and the UK, the US. So we've sort of got 2 to 3 times the number of international students as our sort of comparable nations. Student visa grants have also ramped up quite rapidly. So you can see in the right-hand panel, this shows student visa grants broken down by category in each financial year. So the numbers were building up pre-COVID in terms of the number of student visa grants. They dipped during COVID, but have rebounded back really strongly over the past year. Part of that was driven by sort of a catch-up in terms of student visa numbers, but also by more generous working rights for students and potentially some non-genuine students coming here to study too. But we've seen, large numbers arriving. So many students are allowed to stay on and work after they finish studying. So the temporary graduate visa, which is the main visa, allows eligible international students to stay and work here after they graduate. So the post-study work stream is available to graduates with a bachelor's degree. They can stay here and work unlimited hours for 2 years. Masters stay for 3 years, and PhD graduates can stay for 6 years. On top of this, there are extensions available to these, the duration they can stay. So that's if a person studied and works in a regional area, they can stay for another 1 to 2 years. And also, a change introduced about this time last year at the Jobs and Skills Summit, students that studied in particular areas of nominated skill shortage, so things like health, IT, engineering, education degrees, they get an extra 2 years on top of their initial work rights. And you can see those post-study work visa holders in the orange bar on the right. So they make up the majority of temporary graduate visa holders, and the numbers have been rising. Some vocational graduates can also get post-study work rights and get access to the temporary graduate visa if they've got a certain, there's more conditions attached. So you can see there the red bar on the right-hand side. They make up a much smaller proportion of overall temporary graduate visa holders in the country, but the numbers did jump just during COVID because the rules were relaxed a little bit. There's some other conditions attached to the temporary graduate visa. That's the person's got to be aged under 50 and have competent English language skills. But the message from the chart on the right there is that numbers have risen rapidly. They're rising pre-COVID and have jumped since the borders reopened. So I'll hand over to Tyler now to speak about visa holders in Australia.
Great. Thanks, Trent. And so why we're so concerned about this jump in the number of temporary graduate visa holders in Australia is because many of them struggle in the labour market when they graduate. So what this chart is showing is that many temporary graduate visa holders earn significantly less than domestic graduates. And in fact, most of their incomes actually look much more like working holiday makers who come to Australia predominantly for the purpose of travel, who might work to kind of supplement their income while they're in Australia. We find that many temporary graduate visa holders also don't work in high-skilled industry. 1 in 4 work in retail and hospitality. And we find that about half of them are working in an occupation that's not commensurate with their level of education. And so we did a survey of graduate employers to try and just unpack why it's so hard for them to get a decent job in the labour market. And one of the main reasons was that most employers don't actually take people on a temporary visa in their graduate program. And when we asked them why that was the case, it was not that the problem wasn't actually about the visa that they were on when they were joining the company. It was what happens after the fact, right? So for most employers, they were worried about, can we sponsor someone? Will they be able to stay on long term? And they find that it's too difficult and too hard and too expensive to sponsor international students, international graduates. And the concern is that it's becoming increasingly difficult to get a permanent visa, and therefore to offer employers certainty that graduates will be able to stay on and work in their chosen occupation, right? So in 2014, about over half of international graduates or temporary graduate visa holders went immediately onto a permanent skilled visa after they finished their graduate visa. If you look at the 2017 cohort of international graduates, closer to 25 to 30% went on to a permanent skilled visa. Increasingly, what we're seeing is that more and more international graduates are returning to study, and they're going back onto a student visa. Now, that's not a bad thing if, they're investing more in their human capital, they're going from a bachelor's degree to a master's degree. But in fact, what we're seeing is that most of them are returning to the vet sector. This is despite most of them actually holding master's degrees already. And so what that tells us is that they're just trying to extend their time in Australia, and they're hoping that then they'll be one of the lucky names that gets drawn from the points tested pile and get given a permanent skilled visa. And this is only going to get worse. So there's about 200,000 temporary graduate visa holders in Australia currently. And under the current visa settings, we're projecting that will grow to about 370,000 by 2030. Now, to put this in context, right, there's about 600,000 international students in Australia as of July this year. And there's only 137,000 skilled places. So it's increasingly hard to get a permanent visa, and that's just going to become harder as the number of temporary migrants in Australia grows. And it's unlikely and it's politically unfeasible that governments will be able to increase the number of permanent visas such that we can give certainty to everyone who comes to Australia on a temporary visa. And so the problem is that we're going to be left with an increasingly large cohort of permanently temporary migrants. And there's many reasons why that's a bad thing. So there's a question of ethics. Are we giving international students false hope by saying, well, you might be able to get a permanent visa, even though it's increasingly unlikely that they will be? It's also bad because of the students that do eventually get PR, they've spent years languishing on a temporary visa, and that harms their future career prospects. And that's bad for it's bad for them, and it's bad for Australia because it means that they're going to have less of an economic impact. It also means that you have a growing cohort of people that don't have access to social services and Centrelink support, and therefore aren't able to withstand a bout of unemployment, which puts them at higher risk for exploitation. Australians historically don't like temporary migration, particularly if it's seen as a cheap source of labour, and that undermines trust in the migration system. And we're particularly worried that when you don't have buy-in to the migration system, it leads to knee-jerk policy reactions that are not in Australia's interest. And graduates in limbo also add to population pressures. So we could have a debate about the optimal size of Australia's migration intake, but at the end of the day, our housing market is somewhat inflexible and can't accommodate huge swings in growth in population quickly. We would, here at Grattan, the other side of the program would love to see that and see improvements to the housing market, but that is the fact of the matter at the moment. And at the end of the day, this is a cohort that does add to population pressures when there are other cohorts of migrants that would be adding more benefit to Australia. And it also harms the reputation of our international education sector, right? If you're a graduate, you come to Australia, an international student, you come here hoping to have a fabulous career after you graduate, and you've spent 3 years being exploited at a 7-Eleven, you're probably not going to come back and spruik the praises of Australia's education sector. So for all those reasons, it's really important that we fix this problem. And so I'm going to hand over to Trent to talk about what we can do.
Thanks, Tyler. So what should the government do? given all these issues we've just raised. So we actually think the government needs to redesign the temporary graduate visa to target graduates who have good prospects for permanent residency. So consecutive governments have made decisions that have made the duration of post-study work rights much more generous over the past few years. And that's led to the situation we're in now. So we think the government needs to change course and change course quickly. So importantly, that's about reducing the duration of the visa. So for bachelor's degrees, keeping it unchanged, but for master's by coursework, bringing the duration down from 3 years back to 2 years. Now that's important because about 40 to 45% of international students actually study masters. So it's a big chunk of people. And also bringing back the PhD length as well. Secondly, targeting extensions to graduates who are good picks for permanent residency. So that's removing extensions for students and graduates that study and work in regional areas, and also removing the extensions that were announced last year for people studying in nominated areas of skill shortage. We don't think that's the right way that this visa should be thought about. Instead, we are suggesting a significant change, and that is offering extensions to graduates that are performing well in the labour market. So that's people that are earning $70,000 or more. They should be eligible for a 2-year extension. Thirdly, tightening eligibility. So that's reducing the maximum age down to 35, down from 50 currently, and lifting English language requirements slightly. Finally, increasing certainty for employers. So the survey that Tyler mentioned earlier, another bit of feedback was that the uncertainty around the temporary graduate visa was a factor. The name, how quickly it was issued were issues raised by employers. So we're saying issue the visa automatically subject to some checks, and renaming the visa the post-study work visa rather than the temporary graduate visa, because that temporary in the name sort of puts employers off. In addition, we think a new permanent visa should be created under the global talent visa called the Exceptionally Talented Graduate Visa. This is going to be a permanent visa offered to the most talented international students, international graduates, people in the top 1% of their course, university medal winners, excellent researchers that have fantastic records of publication. A small number, up with 100 to 200 of these visas a year to begin with, may be expanded if it's successful. This is a way to keep the really talented students that may be attracted to move somewhere else, to keep them here in Australia in the long term. So why do we think this approach of moving to a wage threshold for the extension is a good idea? So this chart shows incomes of temporary graduate visa holders broken up by income decile while they're on the visa on the horizontal axis, and what they earn initially. That's the yellow dot. So you can see there's a wide range of incomes. The orange dots then show what these people earn 5 years after graduating, and then the red dots show 8 years after graduating. So you can see on the right-hand side that the highest income earners maintain high incomes. If a graduate earns a high income initially, they're more likely to earn a high income in the future. And same for those people up the top. Down the bottom, people earning a low income initially do get their incomes do rise, but nowhere near as high as for the high income earners initially. So we think earnings on a temporary graduate visa is a great way to pick the most talented people that are going to perform best. Noting that the challenge with migration policy is there's a large number of temporary visa holders looking to migrate permanently and get one of the limited number of permanent skilled visas or permanent visas on offer that Tyler talked about before. So this graduate visa is about identifying talent and people that can come here and contribute to Australia long term. The next set of reforms is fixing the visa pathways for international graduates once their temporary graduate visa expires, to get the best graduates to stay. So again, going back to that survey that Tyler talked about, employers really care about the long-term visa pathway and making sure that their talented employees can stay for the long term. At the moment, they don't trust the visa system to actually deliver that. We've recommended a range of reforms over the past few years here at Grattan about temporary employer sponsorship, permanent employer sponsorship, and we're in the process of doing some work on the points test. So I'll refer you to our website for much more detail on this, because it's quite a complex area and we've got a lot to say about it, but this is certainly a key part of the reform to improve outcomes for international graduates. And finally, assisting international graduates to get a foothold in the labour market. So one thing we really focus on in the report is there is a bunch of barriers that international graduates face when they enter the labour market, not all their own fault. We've talked about the visa process being a significant barrier, and that's putting off employers from taking on international graduates. And there's a whole bunch of stuff we think can help to reduce those barriers and help graduates, perform well when they start working once they leave, once they finish studying. So first, a government campaign to help educate employers about graduate and other visas. Federal and state governments should remove the requirement for permanent residency for public sector jobs where possible, subject to some national security issues. But that currently is a blanket ban basically on temporary graduate visa holders from getting graduate jobs in the public sector. More funding for international graduate settlement and support services. So we think that should come from the universities. We've met with quite a few stakeholders that deliver fantastic services to international students and graduates to help them get a job. We think there could be even more of that done to support international graduates. The federal government should publish detailed league tables on the employment outcomes of international graduates for each university. That helps graduates see which universities, provide the best sort of training to get a good job. Also incentivize universities to support their graduates more and their students more to help them succeed in the labour market. And finally, replacing the fortnightly cap on student work hours with an annual cap. So currently, international students can only work 48 hours a fortnight during study periods when they're studying. This can restrict them from getting things like internships and work experience that are really important to gain that work experience to get the job once they graduate. So moving to an annual cap, which is what Finland does, we think will provide more flexibility, enabling people to get better jobs while working. So that's the end of our presentation. We got quite a few excellent questions from people on the sign-up sheet for this webinar. So I'm just going to run through a few now. So from Andrew, Andrew asked, how does Australia compare on this post-study issue with other key international student destinations, such as Canada and the UK? So Andrew, I'd refer to table 1.2 in the report, where we've got a great breakdown of all the different countries and what they offer. But pretty simply, what we offer now is the most generous of any comparable country. So the change over the past couple of years has made us much more generous. And with our changes that we've suggested, that should actually bring us back to the pack and basically make us pretty similar to the major competitors such as New Zealand, Canada, and the UK. I've got a question from Sajit. What do you think was the reasoning by the government for the recent changes to extend the graduate 485 visa to 4 to 6 years? Tyler, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So the decision to extend the graduate visa happened in the context of the Jobs and Skills Summit, where, Labor was facing a lot of questions about labor shortages. I think the difference here between Jobs and Skills Summit and now is that migration's come back at breakneck speed. International student numbers are running hot, and it looks like they're continuing to, international students are continuing to come back. So perhaps the original policy rationale for that is not as strong. I guess the other thing to bear in mind is, Grattan's previously been quite critical of the idea of labor shortages and the ability of government to predict labor shortages. If you look at the graduate outcomes for those degrees, so IT, engineering particularly, international students don't do particularly well once they graduate in those areas. So it doesn't speak that there's high demand for them to actually go into those occupations anyways. And I think the other thing that government has to be really careful about is that people respond to the incentives you create for them. And so by saying, if you study a certain degree, you get extra time in Australia, you'll get international students choosing to study those degrees, even if it might not be something that they are particularly passionate about or they care about or matches their skills or their talents. And so we think that's kind of bad, because you don't want to be forcing them to spend years of their lives doing something that they don't really want to do just to get a migration outcome.
Thanks, Tyler. And final one, given the time, Lisa asked whether international education should be returned to its original policy intent as an exportable service only with no pathway to PR. So Lisa, no, we don't think that should be the case. So we think there should be a pathway for PR for students, like for other temporary migrants. Talented students are a great prospect for permanent residency and can offer big benefits to Australia. So they're young, highly skilled. The fiscal benefit can be quite large, and there's sort of those innovation spillovers as well. So we think there is a pathway. Of all recent permanent skilled visas, 1/3 went to migrants who first arrived in Australia on a student visa. So it's a really important pipeline. In saying that, we don't think international students should get special treatment just because they studied here. For example, they shouldn't be offered guaranteed PR. Questionable whether they should get extra points on the points test. As mentioned, we're sort of working on that at the moment. But as I mentioned in the presentation, we still think there should be efforts to remove the barriers that international graduates do face. They do get a chance to shine and test the skills in the labour market, which currently there's too many barriers, and that's not the case. So improving the visa system plus other supports lets people, show themselves and potentially get one of those, valuable and limited PR spots. So we think our reforms get the balance right between giving people enough time to prove themselves without so long as to add to population pressures and that problem of people being in limbo on a temporary visa for many years. So thank you everyone for attending. Thank you for all your questions. You can find the full report on the website at www.grattan.edu.au. You can also contact Carla and I directly if you do have any follow-up comments or questions. If you'd like to support the work of Grattan, you can do so at that website. All donations are tax deductible. And thank you for watching.